Thank you very much. I'll start the questions. Assistant Secretary Freihage, access to federal lands that contain tribal sacred sites is an important exercise of the government-to-government relationship, but sometimes simple access is not enough, particularly for the Karuk tribe, which doesn't have a big land base. So how does this bill strike the appropriate balance between tribal and federal interests?
Yeah, I think the bill does strike a strong balance between the two. We think it's consistent with the joint secretarial order signed by the Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture, number 3403, which sets the direction for co-stewardship, co-management between the tribes and land management agencies. I think up front, it's also important to recognize that federal interest does include trust responsibilities of the tribes, including the sacred lands. And so we take that into account, obviously, along with the important responsibilities of land management bureaus. And when you consider the sacred land, the importance to the tribe, as Chairman Atterbury noted, that this is the center of their world. And the bill then taking the step of ensuring that the wild and scenic river components continue to be managed by the Chief of the Forest Service, allows for co-management, and then through the requirement of having an MOU with the Forest Service and the Karuk tribe, that allows them to make sure they're on the same wavelength to ensure that you have that appropriate balance.
Thank you very much. Deputy Director Smith, Native Hawaiians receive health care through HHS as a result of as an expression of the federal government's trust responsibility, but HHS doesn't have an official consultation or confer policy that applies to Native Hawaiians at the moment. Do you need a statute in order to do that?
Thank you for the question, Chair Schatz. I can speak from the Indian Health Service and the department level with regard to the tribal consultation policy as it pertains to federally recognized Indian tribes. That's certainly a question that we could take back, but through the
but I mean, let's be crisp here, right? Native Hawaiians don't have tribal recognition. Native Hawaiians are not currently pursuing tribal recognition. What we're saying is that under the trust responsibility, because there's money being pushed out, is there some way to get at conferring without having to hang your hook on a government-to-government relationship, but rather the trust relationship? Seems to me that you have the flexibility to express the idea, nothing about me without me, without having to try to make a square peg fit into a round hole.
Correct. So similar to what's at play with the proposed bill HR 5221, where other operating divisions outside of the Indian Health Service do not have a specific legal requirement. There's nothing preventing them from conferring, but there's no requirement or policy that allows them to initiate confer.
They're not allowed to do it?
There's nothing preventing them from doing that.
There's nothing preventing them from doing it.
Certainly.
And then you say there's no statute that allows them to do it? That sounds like the lack of a statute prevents them from being able to do it.
There's no statute, to my knowledge, that...
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that if an agency wants to confer, they can confer. And if using certain legal terms triggers a widespread freakout, we can use different words. But the point is, right, that to the extent that there's a trust responsibility, nothing about me without me. And the Biden administration, it seems to me, has a perfect legal right to express that through an internal memorandum, a new rule, a directive from the director of the department or one of the agencies. This is not, I think we're overcomplicating this, and I think there are a bunch of people who are going, gosh, they're not a tribe, so we can't. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, to the extent that there are agencies and organizations that receive funding from HHS, they should be consulted with. And I'm hoping we can work together on this.
We're happy to work with you on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final question for this round. Chairman Clark, you've testified about the difficulties your tribe has encountered as a result of water shortages. How does this settlement help?
Well, thank you for that question. This will help because On one side of the reservation, we have not even looked at, we on the east side. And with the drought as we're looking at today, we are very, very short on water. Like I said earlier, our water on the wells have depleted, and some the wells also collapsed. So now we're taking water from a fire hydrant, putting it in a truck, trucking it to another area for it to get out to Grand Canyon West. In the meantime, our community is suffering because we're taking water from the community to go out there. And if our water truck breaks down or has a flat, then we have to fix that. And again, we're short on water because there's no water going out there. On the east side of the reservation, we've talked about it, but we need to get water on the east side as well, not just on the west side in the community, but also on the east side. So this would really help.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Clark, thank you for that. It sounds like not an ideal situation as you're looking to literally truck water from a fire hydrant. Let me ask you, Mr. Freihage, the Haulapai tribe has been working on completing this water settlement for nearly a decade now. In 2016, I recall that the tribe and the state partner reached an agreement on phase 2. The federal agencies at the time did not support it. Now we've got an agreement with the federal negotiating team, and Interior is testifying in support of this. What happened? What transpired there in the settlement that allowed Interior to now get behind the statement?
I know. I believe one of the factors was on the looking a little more narrow, the focusing of looking at the impacts of groundwater uses, and how that the ability to narrow that so that we'd had a better surety about there would truly be wet water rights for the tribe at the end of the process. And I believe that was one of the critical factors.
The chairman asked you a question about the MOU between the Kark tribe. I raised the issue of Forest Service in my opening. Your testimony states that the department supports agreements with Indian tribes to collaborate in the co-stewardship of federal waters under the jurisdiction of DOI and AG. This legislation is directing the chief of the Forest Service and the tribe to enter into an MOU to protect and enhance wild and scenic river systems, all done in cooperation with the tribe. So in addition to the MOUs, do you need any other tools to support the co-stewardship of lands and waters with the tribes? And just an example I would raise is the 638 contracts under ISDIA, under the Indian Self-Determination Act. They also promote co-stewardship. Is this something that could be helpful in this case?
Yeah, certainly. I think the more that other federal agencies beyond, especially Indian Affairs, IHS, can use 638 contracting, self-governance compacting mechanisms, it's a great tool to allow to engage in tribes and partnerships for co-stewardship, co-management. Another key factor is in our 2023 budget, we have a $14.8 million funding request for land acquisition for tribes. That could be a tool also where tribes could be purchasing lands that end up with some joint strategies with federal agencies. A key part of that is funding, and then the other part is to be able to do that, we need there's currently an annual cap on land acquisition funding that goes back to the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act. So if we could get that lifted to at least the amount we're requesting, plus the 638 contracting and OSG and self-governance compacting, those would be two significant steps forward.
Okay. It's been mentioned that Interior, well, along with the rest of the government, has, of course, a trust responsibility to tribes. How is the Department of Interior going to be involved in upholding that trust responsibility as the tribe and Forest Service negotiate this MOU that's mandated under the legislation?
I think because of the structure sort of set up in the Joint Secretarial Order 3403 with Interior and Agriculture, it outlines a lot of the best practices and policies we can provide for continuing to engage as with the tribe in our trust responsibility, along with the Forest Service, to ensure that that balance is found between the federal and tribal interests. So it would be consistently engaged.
Okay. Mr. Smith, you gave a pretty good outline there about this whole process within HHS for tribal consultation and the development of the Confer policy. I don't know that I actually heard you say whether or not whether HHS actually supports the bill. I think you said that you stand ready to provide technical assistance, but what is the position of HHS on HR 52221?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, in its Declaration of National Indian Health Policy, Congress has specifically declared that it's the policy of the nation to ensure the highest possible health status for Indians and urban Indians. And the Department of Health and Human Services is committed to working with Indian and urban Indian communities to meet this policy. However, as I mentioned, only the Indian Health Service has a legal obligation to confer with urban Indian organizations, and we're the only agency within HHS and federal government at this time that has implemented a formal confer process. So at this time, I cannot speak for our departmental colleagues, but what I can tell you is that we have found the process to be successful and beneficial, and we're happy to provide technical assistance to you.
I think that's kind of maybe a soft support. They think it's going to work. Actually, you know it can work. I'm going to mark that down as a maybe. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired.
Let's follow up together.
Sure.
Senator Smith.
Thank you. I appreciate your question, Senator Murkowski, and your response as well, Senator Schatz. Mr. Smith, and I'll just say that we have been working with the Department of Health and Human Services for a long time trying to get a definitive, yes, we support this, and we have so far been unsuccessful in getting that. However, we have, I think, testimony today that spoke to the power of consultation with urban indigenous communities, and I think that it is an obvious next step that confer process with other parts of the Department of Human Services would also be useful and valuable. And so I would just, Mr. Smith, ask as you return to the Department of Health and Human Services that you tell them that we are eager to work with the department, and we would appreciate it if we could get speedy responses and fast technical support so that we can understand if there are any issues with the legislation so that we can resolve them in order to move it forward. Will you make that commitment to me?
Thank you, Senator Smith. I absolutely will take that back and coordinate.
Okay. All right. Let me go to Dr. Rock, if I may. I'm so grateful to you for joining us today, and I think you're in a great position to help us to understand some of the issues that urban indigenous organizations have had that could be resolved by this kind of confer process. So one example that comes to mind, Dr. Rock, is an issue around data sharing. So Senator Murkowski and I actually have a piece of legislation, the Urban Indian Health, excuse me, I got that wrong. We have a piece of legislation that would get at making sure that the Department of Health and Human Services is sharing public health data with epidemiology centers, tribal epidemiology centers, urban indigenous organizations. Dr. Rock, could you just tell us how this kind of public data sharing with the CDC, for example, would help you in the work that you're doing?
Certainly, it would help at multiple levels. I think, take for example with ARC, with research and patient safety, those are areas that I think we, could make a lot of strides, especially with folks like CDC, with vaccine distribution and things like CARES appropriations pieces, and also including things like missing and murdered Indigenous people. That's something, data is key to start addressing some of these issues, especially folks like out in Seattle with UIHI and the epicenter there. And so having transparent and free flow of information helps all of our urban Indian health organizations. We are really in a key place to address some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that I completely agree with you. You raised in your testimony the issue of the 100% FMAP policy, and we worked hard in the American Rescue Plan to deliver $84 million in direct funds and 2 years of 100% federal medical assistance percentage for services to urban Indigenous organizations, and yet we know that there have been issues with implementation that I think have affected UIOs in every state. Dr. Rock, can you just let us know a little bit about what that looks like in Minnesota and how appropriate consultation might have made this problem a lot easier to resolve?
Certainly. Thank you, Senator. So in fact, about over 20 years of my time have been focused on this issue of 100% FMAP, at least bringing payment parity to urban Indian health organizations, especially during a time of COVID. And for the last 15 months, since the FMAP provisions were enacted, we, of course, have been working with Senator Smith's office, as well as our governor's office, on how to make this a reality. Unfortunately, we have yet to see really any type of activity or actually reimbursement occur utilizing the 100% FMAP through the federal system, which is extremely disappointing, I need to tell you. We continue to seek out solutions moving forward, but I think we're going to need help with our state partners as well as our federal partners, including CMS. This would be an important point to have access and conferring with CMS.
Thank you.
Also.
And I know that you all are not alone in having that challenge with FMAP reimbursement. And again, if there had been good consultation across all of Department of Health and Human Services, that I think would have been easier to resolve. On issues of data sharing, 100% FMAP, I would say also federally qualified health center issues, all of those would be easier to resolve if we had good, the kind of consultation that our bill would require. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Hoeven, are you ready for your questions?
We'll be in just a minute. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Did you need me to stall for a moment?
Yeah, for like 30 seconds. Just to, kind of survey the terrain here. No, we're good.
Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to witnesses. For Deputy Director Smith, the Urban Indian Health Center Act requires the Department of Health and Human Services to confer with urban Indian organizations. So does HHS and its agencies and offices currently confer with urban Indian organizations on an informal basis?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hoeven. As I just mentioned right now, or previously, at this time, the Indian Health Service is the only federal agency that has the legal obligation to confer with urban Indian organizations, and as such is the only federal agency within the department that has a formal policy and process. But having said that, there have been instances where the Indian Health Service has initiated urban confer on behalf of other federal agencies within the department in seeking input on their behalf. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, I'm wondering what impact formal consultation, would have between HHS and urban Indian organizations. So, let's talk about how that's going to change and the fact that it goes from informal to formal and how you think that affects things.
What I can share with you from the Indian Health Service experience is certainly by developing a policy, well, first by having confer defined in statute, which the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act does. It defines confer as as a form of communication that emphasizes trust, respect, and shared responsibility and open exchange of opinions. So that means that two entities are going to be listening to each other and how they're going to listen. We further developed policy around establishing what we're going to talk about. So what you'd find in our policy is a critical event. And to give you an example, throughout the pandemic, Congress provided several supplemental packages that required funding decisions that had a huge impact on urban Indian organizations. And so we engaged in our policy in invoking our policy to confer with urban Indian organizations to solicit their input prior to making those funding decisions. And we believe that that did have an impact on the manner in which we made those decisions.
Do you have other examples?
Another example, one that's actually occurring right now, and we are very thankful to the members of the Senate that signed a letter to the Biden administration earlier this year requesting that the administration consider the formation of an urban interagency work group. Certainly that made its way down through the department, and in May we sent a letter through our acting director, Ms. Fowler, to Senator Padilla saying that we would initiate Urban Confer to look at exploration of an urban interagency task force on behalf of government. And so just recently, earlier this month, we held our first Urban Confer session to hear directly from urban Indian organizations on what that would look like. And so we're actively in that process, and we'll look to going through our process to see what comes from the exploration of that idea of formulating an interagency workforce dedicated to urban Indian organizations.
So then you think that setting that up as a formal process through legislation like this would strengthen that process and be of benefit? Any other thoughts on it?
What we've experienced through the Indian Health Service, again, is that it really helps to identify critical issues and necessary input at the area, local, and national levels on what is deemed as a critical event, whether it's a budget, policy issue, or those items that are outlined in our policy. And we're happy to provide additional technical assistance to you on this matter.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. If there are no more questions for our witnesses, members may also submit follow-up written questions for the record. The hearing record will be open for 2 weeks. I want to thank all of the witnesses for their time and their testimony. This hearing is adjourned.